My name is Pastor Daniel Okafor. For more than 30 years, I have served God with all my heart. I started House of Glory ministry with only 5 people under a mango tree. We prayed there every evening with lantern light until the church grew, and now we have a big building, choir, ushers, even television programs. People say I am a great man of God, but I always tell them it is not me, it is God. My wife, Ngozi, has been my strength from the beginning. She was my first choir mistress and my only love. We have one child, Samuel. God didn't give us more, but Samuel filled the space of 10 children. From small, he was different, quiet, gentle, always reading Bible and helping people. When other boys were chasing girls, Samuel was in church playing keyboard or teaching the children's class. Everybody in church loved him. They called him Pastor Junior. Many mothers even prayed that their sons would grow to be like him. Sometimes, when I looked at him preaching to the youths, I would smile and whisper in my heart, "This is the future of the church." But one thing about life is this: no man truly knows tomorrow. It all started one Sunday morning when Sister Ruth, one of the choir girls, didn't come to church. I didn't notice it at first, but my wife mentioned it after service. She said Ruth had not been around for some weeks and people were beginning to talk. I told her, maybe she travelled. That evening, as I was preparing my sermon notes, my phone rang. It was Elder Nwosu, Ruth's father. His voice was shaking. Open quote. "Pastor," he said, "I need to see you. It's important." Close quote. I told him to come to the house. When he arrived with his wife, I could tell something was wrong. The woman's eyes were red like she had been crying. They sat down, and the man looked at me and said, "Pastor, my daughter is pregnant." I was shocked. I said, "Pregnant? How? Who?" He hesitated. Then his wife burst out crying, "It's your son, Samuel." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like my heart stopped beating. I looked at them, then at my wife, who was staring at me with fear. Open quote. "That's not possible," I said slowly. "Samuel? My Samuel?" Close quote. But they nodded. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed till morning, Bible open but my eyes dry. I kept asking God one question over and over. Why would you let this happen to me? My son, my pride, the one I trusted most, had brought shame to my name, to the church, and to the God I serve. And that was the night everything I built began to shake. That night, after Elder Nwosu left my house, I sat alone in my study. The clock on the wall kept ticking, but my mind was not hearing it. I could still see the tears in his wife's eyes and the disappointment in his voice. "My son Samuel?" I asked myself again. How can this be true? My wife Ngozi came in quietly and sat beside me. "Daniel," she said softly, "maybe we should talk to Samuel first. Let's hear from him before we judge." I nodded slowly. She went to call him from his room. When he entered, he looked calm, like someone who didn't know a storm was waiting for him. "Samuel," I said, "sit down." He sat, his eyes moving from me to his mother. I wanted to shout, but my voice came out weak. "Do you know anything about Ruth's pregnancy?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked down, breathing fast. My wife touched his hand gently. "Talk, my son," she said. Then he whispered, "Daddy, it happened once. I didn't plan it. I'm sorry." Those words broke something inside me. I stood up, turned away, and held the window frame. My legs were shaking. "You?" I said. "You who teach others to live right? You who lead prayers for youth fellowship?" "I'm sorry, Daddy," he said again, tears in his eyes. I couldn't look at him. I just left the room. Ngozi followed me, crying too. We prayed that night, but my prayer had no fire. My heart was heavy. By the next morning, news had already started spreading. Someone must have told someone who told another person. Before noon, my phone was full of messages. Some church members were asking questions, some were already judging. One even said, "Man of God, is it true your son got that girl pregnant?" My chest tightened. 30 years of building a name, and now one mistake was shaking everything. At the church board meeting that evening, the elders were not smiling. Elder Nwosu sat there quietly, his face hard. One of the deacons said, "Pastor, we must protect the image of the ministry. We can't let this scandal destroy what we've built." Another said, "If the news goes out, people will leave the church." I listened to them, but inside me I was fighting tears. Protect the church? What about the truth? What about my son? When the meeting ended, I drove home in silence. My wife was waiting at the door. She asked, "What did they say?" I sighed deeply. "They want us to deny it." I said. She shook her head slowly. "And what will you do?" I didn't answer. I went to my room and sat on the bed again. I remembered the first sermon I ever preached, righteousness before reputation. Now it felt like God was asking me if I truly believed those words. That night I prayed again, but this time I didn't ask God why. I asked him to help me stand, even if standing meant falling in the eyes of men. And I knew then the real storm had just begun. Sunday came faster than I expected. That morning as I wore my suit, my hands were shaking. For the first time in all my years of ministry, I was afraid to face the people I had taught, prayed for, and led. I could already imagine the whispers. Ngozi stood beside the mirror, adjusting my collar. Her eyes were swollen from crying through the night. "Daniel," she said quietly, "no matter what happens today, please remember, Samuel is still our son." I nodded, but my heart was heavy. When we got to church, the compound was already full. People stood in small groups, whispering. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in. Some greeted me with fake smiles, others just looked away. The choir was singing, but even their voices sounded weak. Samuel sat beside me in the front row, his face down, his hands shaking. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Be strong," I whispered. He nodded, but I saw tears drop onto his Bible. When it was time for me to preach, I walked slowly to the pulpit. The microphone felt heavier than usual. The church was quiet, too quiet. I looked at the faces before me, hundreds of them, faces I knew well, faces that once looked at me with respect. Now many looked with suspicion. I opened my Bible but didn't read from it. Instead I said, "Brethren, I stand before you today not as a perfect man, but as a father who is broken." The whole hall went silent. You could hear even the fans turning. I took a deep breath. You have all heard the story. And yes, what you heard is true. My son, Samuel, has made a mistake, a grave one, but he is still my son, and I will not stand here and pretend that it didn't happen. Some people gasped, others bowed their heads. I could see tears on a few faces. "I have taught you all for years that truth is better than image," I continued. "If I hide his sin to protect myself, then I am not worthy to stand on this altar." Then I looked at Samuel and said softly, "Come forward." He stood up, trembling, and came to the front. The church watched in silence. I put my arm around his shoulder and said, "He has confessed. He is ready to take responsibility. But I ask you all, before you judge him, remember your own children, remember your own hearts." For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, one woman stood and began to clap. Others followed, but not everyone. Some people stood up and walked out, shaking their heads. After service, a few members came to greet me with tears, saying, "Pastor, we are with you." But some avoided me completely. That evening, the church WhatsApp groups were full of messages. Some praised my honesty, others said I had destroyed the image of the church. I sat in my office, reading the messages quietly. Ngozi came in and said, "You did the right thing, Daniel." I smiled weakly. "Maybe," I said. But the right thing sometimes costs too much. I didn't know it then, but that confession from the pulpit was only the beginning of the real battle, the kind that doesn't just shake a church, but tests the soul of a man. The week after that Sunday was the hardest week of my life. Everything changed. Members I had prayed for, helped, and even paid their children's school fees started avoiding me. Some stopped coming to church completely. The choir master resigned, saying he needed time to reflect. One of the elders told me quietly, "Pastor, people are saying you should step down for a while." Step down? From the altar I built with my sweat and prayers? It felt like someone was cutting my heart with a knife. When I got home that evening, Ngozi was in the sitting room, crying quietly. She had seen some things online, people posting pictures of me and Samuel, calling us names. "So this is how people destroy a family with their phones," she said. I sat beside her and held her hand. I had no words of comfort. I was broken too. Later that night, Samuel came into my room. He knelt beside my chair and said, "Daddy, I'm sorry for everything. I can tell the elders that I'll go away for some time. Maybe that will calm them down." I looked at my son. His eyes were tired, but I could see the man he was becoming, not perfect but willing to take responsibility. "No, my son," I said softly. "Running will not fix this. Truth doesn't run. We will face it together." On Wednesday, the church board called an emergency meeting. When I entered the hall, the tension was thick. Elder Nwosu was there too, sitting quietly with a straight face. The head deacon cleared his throat and said, "Pastor, the board has decided it's best if you take a break from preaching until this matter cools down." I felt my chest tighten. "A break?" I asked. "From doing God's work because my son made a mistake." Another elder said, "It's not punishment, sir. It's wisdom. People are leaving. Offerings are dropping. The name of the church is suffering." I stood there, looking at all of them, men I had guided for years. "So you are choosing the name of the church over the truth?" I asked. Nobody answered. The silence was loud. Finally, I said, "If my truth is too heavy for this altar, then maybe this altar was never built on truth." I left the hall quietly. Ngozi was waiting for me outside. I didn't need to say anything. She already knew. That night I told her I would not fight them. "Let them have the building," I said. "I will serve God anywhere, even under a tree again." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she nodded. When Sunday came, I didn't go to the big church. Instead, Samuel and I went to a small open field near our old house, the same place where the ministry had started years ago. We carried 2 plastic chairs and a Bible. 5 people came that morning, only 5. But as I began to speak, I felt peace, the kind I hadn't felt in months. Sometimes when the flock scatters, it's not the end. It's just God showing you which sheep truly came for him and which ones came for the show. And that was how a new beginning quietly began. It has been 6 months since that storm broke my life apart. 6 long months of watching everything I built with my hands and prayers fade away. The big church building now has a new pastor. Some members still send messages saying they miss me, but most have moved on. That is how life is. When the light goes dim, people find another one to follow. But God did not leave me empty. Every Sunday morning I still preach, not in a big hall anymore, but in that small open field. We now use wooden benches and a small tent to shield us from the sun. Sometimes when it rains, we all crowd under the tent, singing louder so the sound of the rain won't drown our voices. We call it House of Truth Ministry now. It may be small, but there's peace there. Samuel has changed completely. He no longer acts like the perfect pastor's son. Now he is humble, calm, and ready to learn. Every Sunday he comes early, arranges the chairs, and welcomes people. He and Ruth are married now. The wedding was simple. Only family, a few friends, and those who stayed with us through the storm. When I joined their hands together, I felt something break free in my chest. Not pain this time, but release. 3 months later, Ruth gave birth to a baby boy. The first day I carried that child, tears filled my eyes. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I whispered, "Your grandfather is a pastor who fell and stood again." That night I sat outside looking at the stars. Ngozi brought me a cup of tea. She smiled and said, "See what God did. We thought he was punishing us, but he was teaching us." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "He was showing us that grace is not only for those who never fall, it's also for those who rise again." Sometimes I still pass by the old church. I see the crowd, the cars, the noise, the glamour, and I don't feel pain anymore. I just smile, because I now understand that God's true work is not in the size of the crowd, but in the truth of a man's heart. One Sunday, as I preached about forgiveness, I saw a familiar face sitting quietly at the back. It was Elder Nwosu. After the service, he walked up to me with tears in his eyes. "Pastor Daniel," he said, "I came to say thank you. Ruth told me how you never stopped helping her. I judged you too fast." I held his hands and said, "It's all in the past, my brother. God turned our shame into something better." When he left, I looked around at the small crowd, maybe 20 people that day, singing, clapping, and smiling. And for the first time in many months, I laughed. I lost a church, but I found grace. I lost a crowd, but I found peace. And as I watched Samuel carry his son in his arms near the tent, I knew the name of God was not destroyed, it was purified. Because sometimes falling is not the end, it is where true ministry begins.